Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. We may as well just jump right into this one. UK borrowing was £14.6 billion more than expected in year to March. So the first 3 months of the year, we borrowed nearly £15 billion more than we thought we would, which you have to bear in mind, for the year, the headroom that Rachel Reeves gave herself was £10 billion. So effectively, she's already broken her fiscal rules. Though I'm sure when we go into the details, there'll be some way she hasn't broken the rules, because, believe it or not, national economics is quite complicated. And as you can tell, we can all be depressed or blackpilled, if you will, from the subtitle, "Increase suggests further tax raises or spending cuts from Rachel Reeves may be necessary." They want to cripple the country. So in the financial year to March, the government borrowed £151.9 billion, according to the ONS, up by £20.7 billion across the same 12-month period a year earlier. Oof. This was the third highest borrowing in any fiscal year since records began in 1947, behind the pandemic year of 2021 and the global financial downturn in 2010. Except this time round, there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever. This is just the result of a Labour government. And I suppose you can blame some of it on the Tories as well. At the end of the day, when it comes to economic policy, it can take years for the results to be actually seen. And I'm not giving Labour too much of leeway here. There's no doubt in my mind that the majority of this extra borrowing is from them effectively throwing out pay rises to the public sector, and then the public sector saying, actually, you know what, that's not enough. Plus there's other minutiae, but we'll get into it. As you can see from this graph, how borrowing forecasts have changed. Of all these iterations, you can see that in March 2024 seemed pretty good, just saying, the Tories were in charge there. Then in October, after the autumn budget, it went up quite a bit. In March 2025 they decided to reiterate and up it slightly more, and now, outturn, that's what we have now, it's gone up even further, about 15 billion further, if you will. And this is the OBR's numbers. They are famous for getting these things wrong. As you can see, they've got it wrong 3 times in the past. To be fair, March 2024, that one's understandable. Not really as understandable with the October and March 2025 predictions. I suppose you can at least say with October, you couldn't have imagined what President Trump was going to do with the tariffs, but here we are. Even with their most recent predictions, they're still not great when we look at the outturn. In every situation, they underestimated how much borrowing we'd have to do. They do this every time. So it's going to be even worse next time. In March alone, borrowing totaled £16.4 billion, the third highest figure from the month since records began in 1993. Again, you got to bear in mind that the other two were during a global recession and during a global pandemic. The annual deficit figure was much higher than the £137.3 billion the OBR forecast at the March spring statement. Yeah, again, nearly 15 billion higher. And it just vindicates Liz Truss. Unfortunately, Liz Truss seems to get her message out very, very poorly. She isn't exactly the most personable person in the world. And so it's on Reform to make these points and effectively disassociate from her. I suppose Robert Jenrick can make the points too, but again, the inevitable question is, well, why'd you let this happen for 14 years? It will put pressure on the Chancellor, who will deliver her next comprehensive budget in the autumn after the spending review in June. Increase spending on benefits and public sector pay, cancel out a surge in government tax income, and widen the deficit. Which I think comes as a surprise to absolutely no one. They say a surge in government tax income. It was not to the level they were expecting. And benefits have been rising year on year for frankly ridiculous reasons. Max Tempers is currently at war with councils because they spend more on a single student to get to and from school via taxi than people spend for a year's worth of education at Eton College. Honestly, Austrian, Chicago school, whatever, free marketeers are being absolutely vindicated over the past 30 years, probably close to 20 years of government, and absolutely nobody is listening to them still, because they're seen as evil still, because the left still have cultural hegemony. But they've effectively had their dream policies for, 20 years at this point, as I say, and they still can't accept that their preferred policies are just horrendous. The financial year to March, central government operation spending leapt by £30 billion to, £436 billion, Bear in mind that means it was 400 billion under the Tories, which the ONS attributed to pay rises and higher costs of goods and services. Benefit expenditure jumped by 14.6 billion. Oh, funny, that's how much we borrowed. To 306.1 billion, which means it was about 290 billion under the Tories over the last year. Central government current spending topped 1 trillion last year, up by nearly 50 billion. And I'm constantly told we don't live in a socialist country. I'm constantly told it's just greedy people who don't want to feed the beast even more. No, I'm fed up of my money, my Thursday and Friday being spent working for the government effectively, so they can pay for all this nonsense that I would never in my life dream of paying for myself. Why am I paying for kids to go to school in taxis that cost more than Eton? Why am I paying for that? If you want to get even more black-pilled about all this, by the way, public sector debt reached 2.64 trillion in the 24 to 25 fiscal year as percentage of gross domestic product. Total debt stands at 95.8%, remaining at levels last seen in the 1960s, which was when we were getting out of the whole World War II debt. That is, as it was coming down from a 250% debt when we were decidedly fighting, the Nazis and the Japanese. And now we've managed to, we've had a financial crisis, sure, and then we had a pandemic, sure. I have my doubts that choices we made necessarily had to lead to nearly 100% of the UK's GDP effectively all being fake. But hey, that's pretty much been true since Tony Blair's time. Apparently, government debt interest spending totaled 4.3 billion in the month, down 7.4 billion in the previous month. I'm not entirely sure how government debt interest is paid then, because we've obviously borrowed more, but I don't think international interest rates were slashed, so that's an interesting one. Since the spring statement in March, President Trump has launched his reciprocal tariff plan, which, although delayed by 90 days, still implemented a blanket 10% charge on all imports to the US. Trump has retained a 145% tax on Chinese goods. I think that's been tempered a little bit now, we'll say. But yeah, economically, Britain ain't doing too good. And, well, there's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, spending's mainly getting out of control, with cuts being made where effectively there's quite little political backlash, but it's effectively saving pennies. And amazingly, this was all stuff that even Rory Stewart was asking Rachel Reeves before she was elected, how are you actually going to pay for all this, because I don't see a plan and you're just going to have to borrow instead. Turns out he was right. Rory Stewart can be once right in a blue moon, I suppose. Anyway, but also the whole Trump tariff thing has caused a bit of an issue, which is why Rachel Reeves is preparing to slash car and farm tariffs to seal US deal. Because at the end of the day, if you're in such a state with your finances and you have your own fiscal rules, apparently you do actually have to rely on the private sector somewhat. Why they only do it insofar as we'll tax you 50%, I'm pulling these numbers out of thin air by the way, but an awful lot if you catch my drift, just so you don't have to spend as much when you sell over to America, is beyond me. If I were them, I would equalise the whole damn thing and just make it a flat 20% for everything. Reeves said on Wednesday that she wanted to see trade barriers between the UK and US reduced as part of negotiation with Trump administration. Ministers are understood to be willing to reduce long-standing UK import tariffs of 10% on cars and 12% on agricultural products. I want to see tariffs and non-tariff barriers reduced between UK and US, she told the BBC, before a meeting on Thursday with Scott Bessent, President Trump's most senior economic official. I believe in free trade, no you don't, but I also believe it needs to be fair trade. The only reason she believes in free trade is because it means more free money for the government to spend, by the way. They finally realise that if you actually allow your businesses to make profit, you can tax that profit. That's where the US do have an important point around some of the global imbalances that are built up over the decades that we do need to address. I do love how all these Labour MPs and ministers have had to back down on what they used to say about Trump, that he's a fascist, and say, he's actually all for free trade, and we agree with that. He's actually very liberal, She ruled out giving the American demands to lower import standards on chlorinated chicken. Why? Hormone-treated beef, that one's probably fair, and US-built trucks, don't know about that one. However, to persuade the US administration to reduce the 25% levies imposed on British vehicles last month, the government is understood to be offering to reduce UK's import taxes, possibly down to 2.5%, the amount previously charged by the US. So there you go. And as I say, all this is to improve trade, improve business in the UK, and hopefully we do actually get it. And then hopefully we get reform in and they actually go even further with these trade negotiations so that we can have even freer trade. I don't care what the post-liberals say. Trump put in a whole load of tariffs that a load of post-liberals have been cheering for, and it basically crippled the economy, so well done. Oh, the economy doesn't matter. It obviously does. Stop it. It's ridiculous to say otherwise. So at least that's some good news, but to blackpill you a bit more, spending on disability benefits to soar by 2030 despite cuts. Government forecasts suggest the number of people claiming incapacity benefits will hit 4.1 million by the decade's end. I think it's been said, certainly on Laughing at the Guardian, but on Twitter as well, I believe that the Tory government actually has made more people disabled in Britain than World War One, and that, by the way, includes mental incapacity such as shell shock back in World War One, and I guess autism is counted today, which obviously wouldn't have been back then. Either way, it's a very funny statistic, and so it's no wonder that the bill is going through the roof. Something's obviously going to have to be changed there. Thank God Reform said today that they were effectively going to make it harder to get them by having more independent consultations on whether anyone needs, say, PIP or incapacity benefits, and you can't just do it over the phone. So spending on disability benefits will rise by more than 20 billion. That's more than we're borrowing, or more than the increase in borrowing, sorry, in 1 year despite contentious government cuts, with almost 2 million extra claimants by the end of the decade, official figures show. Updated forecasts show the saving measures have been made only a marginal difference to future rise in sickness benefit spending, and these costs are still soaring as ever more people claim. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? You can get money. Some people need it, obviously. I know people that need it. But when you have people online and Facebook groups and things like that saying, hey, this is how you get the money, just, say that you're suicidal, get doctor's notes that you need all this medication for depression and what have you, and you end up on PIP. Realistically, that is what happens, because you say you're suicidal and can't do anything without feeling suicidal, that counts as not being able to live independently, you get money. Why wouldn't people do that? Many Labour MPs remain deeply unhappy about the 4.8 billion in welfare savings. Oh my god, it could have been nearly 25 billion increase. Set out last month, and ministers are attempting to stave off significant rebellion on reforms in votes due in summer, and this is where Reform are going to do very well next week. However, detailed analysis of welfare trends by the Department for Work and Pensions show the costs of both incapacity and disability benefits will continue to rise. Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, has stressed the need to get more people into work, which Keir Starmer has said is in moral mission. However, figures published on Wednesday's forecast show that the number claiming incapacity paid to people deemed unable to work will rise to 4.1 million, and last year it was 3.3. This projected increase is only 90,000 lower than the envisioned at the autumn budget before the welfare reforms. Well done, Labour. You are doing nowhere near enough, but at least we're going in the right direction, I suppose. Anyway, there's no doubt in my mind here now that the autumn statement is going to mean we're all going to have to pay a bit more tax, there's going to be more spending cuts, and generally the entire country has just managed to shoot itself in the foot. This is very, very, very much a rerun of the 1970s, where you had constant strikes, you had 3-day weeks, rolling blackouts, a winter of discontent where the bins weren't being picked up. Where am I hearing that today? All for largely similar reasons, and what happens in the end, at least, is you got Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. Let's hope in the 2030s, 50 years on, we get a pretty decent emulation of it. I keep hearing Thatcherism isn't the answer, we're not in the same conditions, blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm seeing a lot of the same problems. And yes, you can argue, oh, but that ended up with Tony Blair. Yeah, well, at least now we can see that problem being a possibility in the future, and at least we can prepare for it better. That is my response to that. Labour didn't do anything to prepare for a rerun of Thatcher, so I guess we'll have to do a better job of not having a rerun of Blair. But on that note of the government is doing its best to try and find savings where it can and tax business where it can, and people it will do eventually. I don't think Ed Miliband quite got to that memo, because he plans to ban Chinese slave trade solar panels. Opposition from Labour MPs has forced a ban on panels linked to Uyghur slave labour, putting about 40% of Britain's solar industry at risk. Now, I'm not pro-slave trade, obviously. However, it is quite funny that this is, when you have a big plan to start GB energy and have net zero by 2030 and a load of solar panels anywhere, you've basically just made the whole thing more expensive by effectively not allowing Britain to buy 40% of its solar panels from its original, well, source. The supply chain is completely bonked. Now, I get the avoidance of paying for slave trade industries. However, this really isn't something that you can do unless you have a good alternative ready, so let's see what he had. So obviously this policy is going to threaten net zero ambitions. In a major policy reversal, the Energy Minister Miliband will introduce an amendment to legislation that will force GB Energy to ensure slavery and human trafficking is not taking place in its supply chain. My God. I'm not being funny. Again, I'm against slavery, obviously, but that is going to be one of those things that ends up costing billions of pounds to make sure it is regulated properly. It's okay to take shortcuts if it means we don't bankrupt the country in the meantime. All solar panels, wind turbines and batteries must not contain materials suspected as well, to have been produced through slave labour. Much of the world's supply of polysilicon comes from the Xinjiang region, which is where there are suspected human rights abuses of the Uyghur people. So it's not even if they're confirmed, it's just if they're suspected. Which even in my mind, I mean, no doubt they're doing it, but even in my mind, that's going a little bit too cautious. The reversal was welcomed by some Labour MPs who were I mean, to be honest as well, from my perspective, we wouldn't be doing any of this anyway because we'd be fracking and building nuclear plants. The reversal was welcomed by some Labour MPs who were campaigned on the issue after they were ordered to block the same proposed ban when it was tabled by peers last month. Labour instructed its MPs to vote down an amendment from the Lords which would have changed the Great British Energy Bill, preventing ministers from providing financial assistance to GB Energy if there were credible evidence of modern slavery in the company's supply chain. In other words, the public funds for GB Energy, which I think is it's either a quarter or 40%, I can't remember which one, a decent amount of the investments to GB Energy, we'll say, completely stops. And you've got to bear in mind that for every, I think it is 25%, for every pound put into GB Energy by the government, they expect £3 from the private sector. And so if there's no money from the public sector, well, the private sector won't bother, will they? But yes, this will just make the whole thing even more expensive because now you're being very picky about where you can get your supply of solar panels from, and they're cheapest in China, and they're probably cheapest in China for a reason. Anyway, most of the rest of that article is a lot of MPs and other campaigners saying, oh, modern slavery is bad. Yeah, I know. And absolutely no one bringing up the point that this is going to make GB News effectively not be able to actually afford their ambitions. Because guess what? They will have based most of their costs on probably Chinese imported solar and wind components. But these people aren't very clever, are they? Anyway, another absolutely insane situation we find ourselves in, another great Ed Miliband plan, is regional energy pricing. Now, the thing I will say at the start here is that naturally there probably would already be regional energy pricing if we were in a free market. The thing is that because the energy price crap is national, effectively what ends up happening is that places that could probably get cheaper energy end up paying more because, well, it's a national energy price cap, and those in London probably get it for much cheaper than they would. So once again, there's a bit of subsidising of the South going on here, but to be fair, the South absolutely subsidised directly the rest of the country, so it's probably fair enough. So on Thursday, the Daily Telegraph reported that the government was poised to implement zonal pricing, which would split the country's single national power market into different regions and ultimately raise bills for southern England households. Why not just have a free market at that point, honestly? Miliband dismisses the story as nonsense, saying he would not approve a plan that led to energy price to have a postcode lottery. I don't really think it's a lottery, I think it's basic market forces. But he did confirm that the government was looking to shake up the energy market, which he said could involve zonal pricing and reform national pricing. So, what? So it's nonsense. However, he directly says, oh, but there will be zonal pricing. Okay. Regional pricing is used in some other parts of the world, including Australia, Italy and Sweden. Yeah, because it makes sense. If implemented, it will be the biggest reform of the power market since the 1990s privatisation. Just privatise it again. Under the scheme, power costs would match local supply and demand. In practice, it could lead to lower bills in areas with abundant wind energy like Scotland than households in the south, which obviously don't rely on it as much. Again, as I say, that makes a lot of sense. It's just, it sounds bad to everyone because, oh, why should they pay less than the others? The obvious reason is because supply and demand and market force affect all this sort of thing. The problem I have with Ed Miliband is that quite clearly, especially with that example given, is that yes, while wind energy, when the wind is blowing, is cheaper than, say, gas or nuclear, the problem is that when it isn't happening, you are going to end up with effectively having to pay for these price surges where supply is a lot less because none of it's coming from wind, and so you're going to have to pay when there's no wind to heat your home or whatever from the gas and nuclear that you'll be using instead. I guarantee that the people that will hear, oh, regional pricing, I'll have lower price than other people, oh, that'll be great. When they're hit with these inevitable price surges, they're not going to be happy about it. Obviously, the scheme is supported by energy businesses, including Greg Johnson of Octopus Energy. Mr. Jackson said that it could make the overall system more efficient and reduce the amount of network upgrades needed to shift the electricity from where it's generated to where it's consumed. Yeah, can make sense. Dale Vince doesn't like this, so that's good. The founder of green energy company Ecotricity and a Labour donor said on the BBC Radio 4's Today programme that zonal pricing was a terrible idea as tens of millions of Britons could end up paying more for their energy than they do now. Yeah, that's supply and demand, my man. So what happens when you have an energy price cap? It makes the market go all skew-with, and then as a result, people end up playing skew-with things when you can't keep capping the goddamn prices. So my point here isn't so much that Labour only make bad decisions or implement terrible things. My point is that they are certainly doing an awful lot of things that are unpopular for their own base. Anyway, to finish off, I'm just going to show you how much of an idiot Ed Miliband is. So here he is on Sky News, defending the absolutely ridiculous tax system that we have on energy companies.
Energy companies in this country are taxed at 78% on energy profits. That pushes up prices too.
No, that's wrong.
It's just absolutely incredible scenes, isn't it? We've just had an entire kerfuffle with the Americans, putting tariffs on absolutely everything, and the main argument against them was, wow, prices are going to go up for everything because it's a tax. Yet when it comes to the energy sector, for some reason Ed Miliband thinks, no, taxes don't affect prices, especially if they're at 78%. Excuse me? It's not even capped at 78%, by the way. I've gone through it before, but there was a medium-sized oil extraction company, something like that. They were taxed 113% on profits. They were literally taxed into losses. It was incredible. This is how ridiculous our tax system is, that it shouldn't... To be honest with you, nothing should be taxed, frankly, over 50%. At the very largest. If it were my ideal world, nothing would be taxed over 20%. But no, 50%, you know, I'll give the leftists a little bit of leeway there. The fact that anything is taxed to 78% is ridiculous on the face of it, but the fact that anything with our tax system can be taxed over 100% is absolutely crazy, and I've never seen anything like it before. And for Ed Miliband to claim that it doesn't affect energy prices, just ridiculous.
Look,
it's not 78%?
It is 78%, but it's not incredible.
Whereas obviously regular corporate tax is 25%.
It's really important to make this point. Oil and gas is set, the price of oil and gas is set on the international market.
I mean, that's kind of true, but not really. The problem we have is that an awful lot of our gas is imported over from the US, and it has to be effectively frozen to the point where it becomes liquid, and then transported on big old ships which pump out even more gas, greenhouse gas, I should say. And not only that, they cost an awful lot of money, and then when it gets here, obviously you have to pay for all that. And it's true, it's a wholesale price, and that is largely on an international market. The thing is that if you actually have your own oil and gas being produced in the UK, obviously you don't have to pay for that transportation. And either way, doesn't really matter. The big problem, obviously, here is that an awful lot of the price that is set by the international market is going to be pumped up in the UK when the profits for the people who get that energy to you have to pay 78% on every profit that they make. It's ridiculous. It's obviously not sustainable. And the Tories put it in place, by the way. Labour wanted it to go further to 90%, by the way.
The reason why...
That's the raw commodity price, in the same way that the prices of batteries is set on the raw, the raw commodity price.
It's not set by the tax rate on UK companies, is what I'm saying. It's set by the global price. You see,
I have pretty much the same stunned sense of shock that the Sky News reporter has here. What the hell is he talking about? Yeah, the wholesale gas price is obviously set by a global market. The problem you have is that there's a hell of a lot more things in the supply chain before people actually get that energy, and you're taxing it all. And that's obviously going to put up prices. Why can't you say anything about that?
I understand that, but you're saying that tax rates don't impact pricing?
I'm saying that in relation to oil and gas, they don't, because the truth is that the price for our oil and gas is set internationally. And let me explain. Let me just...
I mean, listen, Sky News is probably one of my least favourite news sources, to be quite honest with you. They were the ones that made that absolutely absurd graph that tried to say, oh, Reform are actually spending the most. in the last election, despite the fact that they completely ignored all the savings that they were making as well. I did a whole video on it, doesn't matter. But even Sky News presenters are thinking, God, even I understand economics better than our literal minister, who effectively overlooks the economics of energy. Vote Labour, get Labour, elections have consequences. Electoral politics actually matters. I don't care what the dork right say.
If you just let me make the point. Why did prices go through the roof when Russia invaded Ukraine?
Are we seriously doing this? Do you think do you think prices are a unilateral mechanism? There's a one-to-one correlation with prices and one particular aspect of the supply chain. Are you mad? You know, gas prices went way down because of a pandemic. You know, gas prices aren't only affected by global geopolitical disasters. What are you talking about?
Right, well, our prices went through the roof, even though we imported a very small amount from Russia. That's because whether the gas was coming from the North Sea or internationally, it was priced on the international market.
Yeah, well, amazingly, prices also went up as it got more taxed. So if we're going by these correlations, I'm not being funny, but you don't have a leg to stand on. I hope the Sky News guy explains that as well.
That's why we're in the grip of fossil fuel markets controlled by others, petrostates, and that wasn't about the UK tax rate. The UK tax rate could have been cut or higher, and it wouldn't have made an impact.
That's a separate...
Absolute, complete and utter madness. Again, we've had a whole couple of weeks. Has it been a month? I don't know. It's felt like a month. But we've had a whole kerfuffle, as I say, with America talking about international trade and tax rates and how prices are going to go up for everyone because of all these tariffs that have been slapped on everyone, and China with the supposedly 145% that's coming down anyway. Why is it coming down, Ed Miliband? Is it because it affects prices? Does tax affect prices? Incredible. This guy runs our energy sector, by the way.
The floating price of commodities is a legitimate but separate point. Another point for why this country has unbelievably high energy prices is that we tax our energy companies.
You're wrong. I'm really sorry, but you're wrong about that because the price is set internationally.
You look at any of the statistics on energy prices in Europe, Britain is far and away the most expensive place to buy your energy. We talked about international markets. You know, oh, what's France done? Okay, they've gone nuclear. Fair enough. Germany, they had to buy in a load of coal to fire up their power stations, their coal power stations, I should say, because they went hard on the green stuff and it turned out to be terrible. And then they decided no nuclear whatsoever. That went badly as well. And even with those absolutely terrible decisions, they still have manageable energy prices. You cannot look at this map and say, yeah, the only reason the UK has high energy prices is because of those greedy international markets, when internationally we have the worst energy prices. No, we are doing something uniquely terrible here. And a big thing is the tax. No doubt about it.
I'm really sorry, but that's not correct.
OK, well, let's put commodities aside. If you increase taxes on supermarkets to 78%... It
depends whether it's...
If you increase taxes on supermarkets to 78%, what would happen to the price of food?
It depends.
What would happen to the price of food?
It depends whether it's a domestic market where the price is set domestically.
Depend. This is a globally unquestionable factor about economics.
The fact that Sky News, by the way, is quite left-wing in the UK, but the fact that Sky News is having to teach basic economic facts to our energy minister just shows you how far we've fallen. Maybe they should get Rachel Reeves on as well to teach some basics about economics as well, because this is getting ridiculous. He's trying to dodge, he's trying to effectively lie to everyone that taxes don't make an impact in any way on prices. That's just, how could you claim that? I don't understand. This is something I'd expect from 18-year-olds who've never even touched the subject, but this is Ed Miliband. I get he was a Marxist when he was younger, but you're supposed to grow out of that by the time you're 20.
You're right that your point also applies. You can't flatly deny my point.
I am denying your point when it comes to the question of these internationally set prices. That's the point I'm making to you.
What is going on? He's having to explain a third time. Obviously, if you raise taxes on a certain commodity, that commodity's price increases. This is incredible.
The tax of 78% on energy companies to the regular...
On oil and gas companies, it wouldn't make a difference to the price. In fact...
Yes, it would.
I think Ed Miliband's trying to dodge this entire question by trying to only talk about the wholesale international price, which isn't what the Sky News reporter's talking about at all. That's why he had to move over to supermarkets, where it's like, you know, you put a tax on supermarkets, obviously all their prices are going to go up. In fact, we've seen that. That's what national insurance contribution is. That's why meal deals in Tesco are now nearly £4.
I'm afraid it wouldn't because the point is that the price is set internationally.
But there are lots of things that factor into the price that we pay. The lots of supply chain costs you've mentioned yourself. This is a huge cost in the supply chain.
And that's where the clip ends. It's just the Sky News reporter having to tell a minister in charge of our energy policy how energy prices are actually set. Again, Ed Miliband has influence over how the energy price cap is set. And he doesn't understand, for some reason, that taxes affect consumer prices. So if you're ever wondering why our government seems way worse than the Tories, it's because at the very least Tories did understand supply and demand, they just decided to ignore it for votes for years. So hopefully Labour put us in a position where Reform have no choice but to fix the whole thing, so there we go. Anyway, I think that'll do it for today. Videos out as and when I can make them. Next Tuesday it's Tosh Talks, next Saturday it's Laughing at the Guardian. If you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. If you want to help further, become a channel member, or give super chats and super thanks in any stream or video that I do. With that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.